Evan had flown through dangerous space routes before, but this time something felt wrong from the start. His ship shook again and again as red lights flashed across the control panel. Sparks jumped from broken wires. A loud warning alarm screamed in his ears. He tried to pull the ship upward, but the engines failed. The whole vessel dropped like a stone toward the unknown planet below. Outside the window, Evan saw only dark forests, blue fog, and tall mountains. He tried one last time to restart the power, but nothing worked. The ship hit the ground with a violent crash. Metal bent. Glass shattered. Evan was thrown hard against his seat. For a few minutes, he could not move. He could barely breathe. Smoke filled the cabin, burning his eyes. His legs hurt badly, and one arm felt numb. He touched his suit panel, trying to activate emergency mode, but the system was too damaged. He did not know if he would survive the next few hours. Then he heard something outside the ship. Soft footsteps. Not human footsteps. Evan froze. He knew. He had crashed on a foreign world. Anything could be living here: dangerous animals, hostile tribes, or beings who hated humans. He slowly reached for a broken metal piece to use as a weapon. Even though his hands were shaking, the footsteps came closer. Slow, gentle, careful. The ship door was half broken, hanging open. A small shadow appeared at the entrance. Evan held his breath. He expected a monster with sharp teeth and claws, but instead, it was a child. A small alien girl with glowing blue eyes and soft silver skin stood there. She wore a simple brown cloth and carried something in both hands. Her body trembled as she looked at him, like she was scared, but also curious. Evan did not move. He didn't want to frighten her. The girl stepped inside the ship slowly, her feet making tiny tapping sounds. She looked around at the broken machines and smoke. She seemed sad for him. Then she walked closer and placed a small wooden bowl beside him. Warm steam rose from the bowl. Soup. Evan stared at her in disbelief. Was she trying to help him? The girl pointed at the bowl, then pointed at him, and nodded gently. Her eyes were full of kindness. Evan whispered, "Thank you," even though he knew she probably did not understand human language. His voice was weak, but the girl smiled a small, shy smile and stepped back. Before she could leave, the ground shook lightly. Heavy footsteps approached the ship, much heavier than the girl's steps. Evan felt fear crawl up his spine again. The girl quickly ran to the door and peeked outside. Then she looked at him with wide eyes, silently telling him to stay quiet. A tall shadow blocked the doorway. It was the girl's mother. Her skin was darker, marked with tribal symbols. She had sharp eyes, long braided hair, and carried a spear made from crystal-like stone. Her presence filled the ruined ship with danger. She looked at Evan like he was a threat, a danger to her child. She stepped inside, inspecting her daughter quickly to make sure she was not hurt. Then she looked at the bowl next to Evan. Her expression changed from anger to shock. The child had shared food with a human, something clearly forbidden. The mother raised her weapon slightly. Evan lifted his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. But the mother did not trust him. Her voice was deep and powerful as she spoke in her language, pointing at him and then touching her daughter's head protectively. Evan could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "If you hurt my child, you die." Her tone was full of warning. Her eyes were full of fire. The alien child tugged her mother's arm, trying to explain. She pointed at Evan's injuries, at the broken ship, at the bowl. Her tiny voice was fast and emotional. She wanted her mother to understand that the human was not dangerous. He was hurt, and he needed help. For a moment, the mother stood silent. She looked at Evan again, this time less like an enemy and more like a confused survivor. The wind outside howled through the broken metal. Smoke swirled between them. Evan waited, not knowing if she would attack or allow him to live. Finally, the mother lowered her spear a little. Not fully, but enough to show she would not kill him immediately. Still, she pointed at him again, her eyes cold and sharp. A silent promise. One wrong move, human, and your life ends. And with that warning, the real story began. The air inside the broken ship felt colder as the alien mother stood there, guarding her daughter. Evan stayed completely still, afraid any small movement would look dangerous. To her, his heart beat hard in his chest. He had survived the crash, but he was not sure he would survive this. The mother's eyes never left him. Her grip on the crystal spear tightened. She studied him like he was some kind of wild creature. Evan wanted to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, she raised the spear a little higher, warning him to stay silent at the small alien girl. Leary moved closer to her mother's leg. She held the edge of her mother's clothing and whispered something softly. Her voice was calm, gentle, almost musical. Leary kept pointing at Evan, then at the soup bowl, trying to explain that she had helped him. Her mother, Rylana, looked shocked that her daughter had fed a human. Evan didn't know what their species called humans. Maybe they had stories about humans, dark, frightening stories that made them believe humans only brought death. From the mother's expression, he could tell she believed those stories. The wind outside pushed loose scraps of metal against the ground, making loud clanging noises. Each sound made Rylana's body tense. She clearly expected danger to appear at any moment, from Evan or from the wild creatures that lived on this planet. Finally, Evan raised one slow hand and pointed at his injured leg. He winced to show pain, hoping she understood. Rylana did not attack, but she didn't help him either. Liri, however, stepped forward. She knelt beside Evan's leg and touched the edge of his torn suit. She looked up at her mother, begging for permission to help. Rylana's jaw tightened. Her eyes moved from Evan's injury to her daughter, then back to Evan. After a long tense moment, she lowered her spear slightly. It wasn't trust. It was permission. Leary smiled brightly and ran outside the ship. Evan heard her footsteps disappear into the forest. Rylana stayed behind still, watching him. She circled around him slowly, studying each piece of human technology on his suit. She tapped the glowing emergency button with the tip of her spear, confused by its light. When Evan tried to adjust his breathing mask, Rylana stepped forward quickly, her spear pressing against his chest. Evan froze again. The message was clear. Do not touch anything. Do not do anything. Minutes passed in silence. Then Leary returned, carrying green leaves and a small stone jar filled with thick blue liquid. She placed everything gently on the ground beside Evan. Rylana inspected the items first, making sure they were safe, then nodded once. Leary opened the jar and dipped a leaf inside. The liquid smelled sharp, like medicine. She pressed the leaf against Evan's leg wound. A cold shock ran through his skin. He gasped, surprised. Leary smiled at him as if to say, "It is okay. It will help." Rylana watched carefully, ready to stop everything if Evan reacted badly. Evan nodded slowly to show he was grateful, for the first time. Rylana looked confused rather than angry. Maybe she expected humans to be loud, rude, or violent. But this human was quiet, respectful, weak and injured. A survivor, not a threat. She spoke again in her language. Her voice was heavy with warning. Evan could not understand her words, but he understood the tone. You live because my daughter wants you to live, nothing more. After treating his leg, Leary brought him a folded blanket made from soft animal fur. She placed it over his lap. Evan felt warmth return to his body slowly. He whispered, "Thank you," even if she did not understand. But Rylana understood the emotion in his voice, the softness, not aggression. She stepped closer until her shadow covered him. Her expression was sharp, serious, almost frightening. She tapped her chest with one hand, then pointed at Evan, then drew a line across her throat slow and clear. Evan knew exactly what she meant. If you harm her, I will kill you. Her voice followed low, threatening, full of power. Leary grabbed her mother's hand, gently shaking her head, trying to calm her down. Raylana took a deep breath, but did not soften. After a moment, she lowered her spear. Completely, not because she trusted Evan, but because Leary trusted him. Raylana motioned toward the forest, signaling that she must leave to gather more supplies. Leary looked at Evan one last time before following her mother out of the ship. Her small hand waved at him shyly. As they disappeared into the trees, Evan leaned back and closed his eyes. He had survived the crash. He had survived the first meeting. But he was trapped, injured, and completely alone on a world where trust was rare. And one wrong move meant death. Yet for the first time since the crash, he felt a strange spark of hope. A child had saved him. Maybe he could survive here after all. Evan woke to the sound of distant echoing calls, strange animal cries that rose and fell like wind cutting through metal. His body still hurt, but the medicine Leary used had reduced the pain. He could at least sit up now. The smoke inside the ship had thinned, replaced by the earthy smell of the alien forest outside. He wanted to believe he was safe for the moment. But deep inside he knew this planet held dangers he didn't understand. As he waited, he looked around the broken cabin. His communication device was cracked. The emergency beacon was blinking, but the signal strength was almost zero. Without help, he could die here. Suddenly, he heard footsteps again, light ones. Leary appeared inside the ship with a small basket. She smiled softly, her silver eyes full of innocence. She placed the basket near him and opened it. Inside were round fruits, glowing faint blue, and small pieces of flat-baked bread. She pushed the basket toward him with both hands, insisting he eat. Evan gave her a grateful nod. Thank you again. Leary sat across from him and watched him eat, her head tilted with curiosity, like she was studying him as much as he was studying her. Every time he chewed, she smiled wider, proud that he liked the food. It was strange, in a comforting way. After a while, Evan pointed at himself and said slowly, Evan. Then he pointed at her. She blinked, then pointed at her chest. Leary. Evan. Repeated Leary. Her face lit up happily, but the peaceful moment didn't last long. A harsh sound cut through the forest, a loud, roaring horn. Leary's expression changed instantly. Her smile vanished. Fear filled her eyes. She grabbed Evan's arm tightly, almost begging him not to move. She whispered quickly in her language, looking toward the forest entrance. Evan didn't understand the words, but he understood her fear. Raylana rushed into the ship a moment later, spear already in hand. Her breathing was fast, and her eyes burned with urgency. She grabbed Leary and pulled her close. Raylana pointed at Evan's ship controls, then at the glowing fruit basket, then at the forest. Her words were sharp, like commands. Evan frowned, trying his best to understand. Then he realized she wasn't warning him about her. She was warning him about something else, something outside. Something dangerous. Raylana stepped toward him and pointed at his injured leg, shaking her head. She was telling him he could not escape, even if he tried. Then she pointed at the forest again and made the shape of large claws with her fingers. Evan's heart dropped. There were predators out there. And judging by her expression, they were getting closer. Raylana motioned for Leary to stay behind her. The sound of snapping branches came from the trees. Heavy breathing echoed outside. Evan looked through the cracked window and saw two glowing yellow eyes staring from the darkness. A creature stepped out, a tall beast with thick fur, long arms, and teeth like sharp crystal. It sniffed the air, following Evan's scent. Another creature joined it, then another, a pack. Evan swallowed hard. Leary hid behind her mother, trembling. Rhaelana raised her spear, her posture strong, ready to defend her daughter at any cost. Evan tried to stand, but pain stabbed up his leg, forcing him to fall against the wall. His weakness frustrated him. He hated feeling useless while someone else risked their life because of him. The beasts approached the broken ship. Sniffing, growling, circling, Rhaelana shouted something in her language, fierce, commanding. She stood at the entrance like a shield. Evan looked around desperately for something, anything he could use to help. His eyes landed on a small device, half buried under debris. His suit's emergency flare pod. It still had one shot. He crawled toward it slowly, dragging himself across the cabin floor. Every movement hurt, but he forced himself to continue. Outside, the beasts growled louder. One jumped onto the ship roof, shaking the whole structure. Leary screamed. Rhaelana pushed her behind a metal panel, blocking her view of the beasts. But she couldn't protect her from fear. Evan grabbed the flare pod. With shaking hands, he aimed it out of the broken window. The beasts snarled at him, ready to charge. He fired. A bright red flare shot into the sky, bursting with a loud crack. The beasts yelped and backed away, confused and frightened by the sudden explosion of light. Rhaelana's eyes widened. She had never seen such technology. The flare landed far away, burning brightly. The beasts followed the heat and light, running toward it, disappearing into the trees. Silence returned. Rhaelana lowered her spear and turned slowly toward Evan. Her face was unreadable: anger, shock, confusion, and something new. Respect. Leary ran to Evan and hugged him, her tiny arms filled with gratitude. Rhaelana watched quietly. For the first time, she did not see him as a threat. She saw him as someone who protected her daughter, someone who fought their monsters, someone who, maybe, could be trusted. Just a little. Maybe. Asterisk. The forest grew strangely quiet after the beasts disappeared, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. Evan leaned back against the cracked wall of his ship, exhausted. His chest rose and fell fast. His injured leg throbbed, but he ignored the pain. He looked at Leary, who was still holding his arm tightly, her tiny body shaking. Rhaelana stood near the entrance, staring at the burnt flare in the distance. Her eyes were full of deep questions. She had never seen a human device before, and she had never seen light so bright and powerful. For a moment, she looked less like a warrior, and more like a mother trying to understand a world bigger than she expected. She turned toward Evan. Her voice was slow, almost soft as she spoke. A single sentence in her language. Evan didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. You saved my daughter. Leary looked up and nodded happily, repeating Evan's name like a small whispering song. Evan, Evan. For the first time, Rhaelana didn't silence her. She allowed the child to speak freely, to smile, to touch his hand without fear. But the moment of peace was short. A strong wind swept through the forest, bending the tall glowing plants outside. The temperature dropped suddenly, turning the air cold and biting. Rhaelana stiffened. She rushed forward and pushed a large metal panel against the broken doorway. The ship shook again, but this time not because of beasts, because of the night. Leary grabbed a fur blanket and wrapped it around Evan, then around herself. She crawled beside him and pressed her head against his chest, seeking warmth. Evan gently held the blanket around her. Rhaelana checked the cracks in the walls, stuffing them with plant fibers to block cold air. She worked fast, her hands moving. With experience. Evan watched her carefully. He could see she wasn't just a fighter, she was a survivor. She knew this world's dangers in ways he never could. When she finished, she sat across from them, her spear resting on her knees. The dim blue light of the glowing fruits cast shadows around her face. Evan had so many questions. Why was the night so dangerous? What lived out there? Why did the beasts attack? Was there a safer place on this planet? Leary solved part of the mystery for him without speaking a word. She pointed at the ceiling, then drew a circle in the air with her finger. Then she touched her arms, pretending to shiver, and whispered something. Her voice was tiny, like snow falling. Evan understood. Nights were deadly cold. Rylana added more details with gestures. She pointed outside, then moved her hand downward like falling snow. Then she made a clawing gesture, then a biting one. She pointed at her spear, then at the door. Evan was slower to read her movements, but finally he pieced it together. At night, the temperature dropped to freezing. Beasts became more aggressive. Even the forest itself turned dangerous. No one survived outside after dark. The crash had happened only minutes before evening. Evan had been lucky, very lucky, Leary found him in time. Suddenly, a long, deep howl echoed through the distance. Leary gasped and buried her face in Evan's chest. He gently placed a hand on her head to comfort her. Rylana stood instantly, spear raised, every muscle ready. Evan looked at the wall. Another dark shape passed by the window, larger than the beasts from earlier. Heavy breaths fogged the small cracks. The creature sniffed, searching for warmth, movement, or food. A deep growl followed. Evan felt the vibration through the metal. Rylana moved silently to Leary and placed a hand on her shoulder. She whispered something to her daughter, a calming, melody-like sound. Leary pressed herself even closer to Evan. Minutes passed like hours. The temperature dropped lower. The creature paced outside, scraping claws on metal. Evan felt Leary's small body trembling. He wrapped the blanket tighter around both of them. Even Rylana's hands shook slightly from the cold. Then, a sudden loud crack echoed outside. Trees snapped. Heavy footsteps retreated. And the creature roared in frustration before finally disappearing into the depths of the forest. Lana exhaled for the first time in several minutes. She sat down near the door, exhausted, but still alert. Evan looked at Rylana, then at Leary. He realized something important, even if he was a stranger. Even if Rylana didn't trust him yet. They were all fighting to survive the same night. They shared the same fear, the same cold, the same danger. In that small broken ship, something new formed between them, something fragile, but real. Beginning, night slowly grew quieter. Leary fell asleep leaning against Evan. Rylana watched them both in silence, her spear resting across her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But she didn't stop her daughter from sleeping beside. A human. That small decision said more than words ever could. Evan closed his eyes, knowing morning would bring new dangers and new decisions. Morning on the alien world did not arrive gently. Light burst through the cracks of the broken ship like sharp spears. Evan blinked several times before his eyes fully adjusted. His body felt stiff, but warmer than last night, thanks to Leary's tiny form curled beside him. Wrapped in the shared blanket, Rylana was already awake. She stood at the doorway, looking out at the forest as if measuring every sound, every smell, every possible danger. Her spear rested in her hand, the tip glowing faintly under the morning light. When she noticed Evan waking, she turned toward him. Her expression was unreadable, not hostile anymore, but not friendly either. Something in the middle, uncertain, calculating, cautious. Leary stretched like a cat and stood up, rubbing her sleepy eyes. When she saw Evan awake, she smiled and ran to him, giving a small excited sound. She touched his bandaged leg to check if he was okay. Evan smiled back. "I'm okay, thanks to you." Leary didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She beamed proudly. Rylana watched the moment with a strange expression, something between confusion and worry. She didn't stop Leary, but she didn't look relaxed either. She walked toward them and knelt near Evan. She pointed at his leg and made a slow downward motion with her hand. Evan finally understood. She wanted to see if the wound had improved. He pulled the blanket aside and showed her the treated area. Raylana inspected it with careful eyes, touching lightly around the edges. Evan winced at first, but the pain had reduced a lot. Leary leaned close, watching every move her mother made. Raylana nodded once. The medicine was working, but then she surprised Evan. She pointed at the broken ship, then at the sky, then at his leg. Then she shook her head firmly. Evan understood in a single chilling moment. You cannot fix your ship. You cannot leave. Not like this. His chest tightened. He had hoped that with morning light he could check his equipment and maybe repair something. Now he realized the truth. The crash damage was much worse than he thought. He sighed deeply and pressed his head back against the cold metal wall. He felt helpless again. Leary touched his hand softly, as if sensing his sadness. She made a small, comforting sound, soft, musical, full of warmth. Raylana watched them, and something changed in her eyes. A softness, a question. A memory, maybe. She stood up and motioned for Leary to follow her outside. Leary obeyed, but before leaving, she turned and waved at Evan. He waved back, trying to smile. The moment they were outside, Raylana grabbed Leary's shoulders and spoke sharply. Evan couldn't hear the exact words, but he knew the tone. It was fear. Fear of what? Fear of what might happen if Leary got too close. Fear of the unknown. Ali argued back in her tiny voice, pointing at Evan again and again, trying to tell her mother he was good. Raylana's jaw tightened. She raised her voice, something she rarely did. Leary froze. The argument was over. Raylana returned inside alone. She stood in front of Evan, her posture straight and commanding. She pointed at Leary outside, then at Evan, then drew two lines in the dirt, one line for Evan, one for her daughter. A boundary, a rule, a warning. Evan nodded slowly. He understood. She was a mother trying to protect her child, but something heavy sat in his heart. He didn't want to cause problems between them. He didn't want Leary to get in trouble because of him. He looked down at the metal piece in his hand, part of his suit communication system. It was cracked, dirty, almost useless, but maybe not beyond repair. While Raylana scanned the forest, Evan began to open the device carefully. Wires hung loose. The internal core was damaged, but not completely broken. If he could reconnect a few parts, maybe he could send a short signal. Not enough for rescue, but enough to show direction. Leary slipped back inside quietly when her mother wasn't looking. She knelt beside Evan and watched him work, fascinated by the bright wires. She made soft sounds, pointing at each part as if asking what they did. Evan smiled gently. He held up one small crystal-like wire and said, "Power." She repeated the word softly, testing it on her tongue. "Pow." Evan nodded proudly. The moment was peaceful. Until Raylana turned around and saw them together again. Her eyes widened with frustration. She stormed inside, grabbed Leary by the arm, and pulled her away from Evan. She was not angry at Evan. She was angry at the bond forming between her daughter and a human she didn't understand. She pointed at Evan again, her voice thick with fear and warning. Evan understood her message clearly. Humans bring danger. Humans bring loss. Humans cannot stay. But then he looked into Leary's trembling eyes and saw something different. "You are my friend. Don't leave." Evan lowered his head, trapped between two worlds. A child's trust and a mother's fear. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything that came next. The afternoon sun on the alien world was weak, barely giving any warmth. Evan sat just inside the ship's doorway, fixing the last wire on his damaged communicator. His fingers trembled from exhaustion, but he kept working. Every second mattered now. He needed a signal, any signal, to survive. Outside, Raylana walked in slow circles around the ship, checking every direction, every shadow, every rustling leaf. Her spear remained in her hand, ready at all times. She did not trust this quiet. The forest usually made noise, but today it was silent, too silent. Leary sat beside Evan, drawing shapes in the dust with a small stick. She stayed close to him, even though her mother had warned her many times. Every few minutes she glanced outside, waiting for Rylana to turn away so she could whisper tiny words. Evan didn't understand, but her eyes were full of trust, the kind of trust that made Evan's heart ache. Rylana finally stopped in front of the ship. Her expression was dark, filled with worry. She motioned for Leary to come to her. Leary hesitated. She didn't want to leave Evan's side. Rylana's voice rose sharply, full of warning. Leary flinched and slowly walked to her mother. Evan could feel the tension between them. Rylana didn't hate him. She feared losing her daughter again. He could see it clearly now. Rylana crouched in front of Leary and spoke softly this time. Her voice trembled. She cupped Leary's cheeks gently and touched her forehead to her daughter's. Evan didn't know what she said, but the love in her voice was deep and painful. Then Leary pointed at Evan again. She didn't want to abandon their human friend. Rylana's Alingawint. Shoulders dropped. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she opened them and looked at Evan with an expression he had never seen before. Not hatred, not confusion, not anger. Fear of what was coming. Before Evan could ask anything, the forest exploded with sound. A distant roar shook the ground. Birds took flight. Trees bent as if something huge was moving through them. Rylana pushed Leary behind her with one hand and raised her spear. Evan's blood ran cold. This wasn't like the beasts from last night. This was bigger, stronger, hungrier. Rylana shouted something in her language, a command for Leary to run. Leary grabbed her mother's arm, shaking her head fiercely. She didn't want to leave. Evan struggled to stand, using the broken metal wall as support. His legs shook badly, but he forced himself up. He couldn't sit while they faced danger. The roar came again, closer now. Trees snapped like twigs. Rylana grabbed Leary's face and whispered one last command. Leary sobbed, but obeyed this time. She ran inside the ship and hid behind a metal panel. Rylana stood in front of the entrance alone. The forest trembled. A massive creature burst through the trees. It was twice the size of last night's beasts, with thick black fur and bone-like plates on its back. Its jaws opened wide, revealing long gleaming fangs. It smelled the air and locked eyes on Rylana. Evan's heart stopped. Rylana did not move. She planted her feet firmly, spear aimed upward. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. The creature roared and charged. Rylana yelled her battle cry and ran toward it. Evan shouted, "No!" But she couldn't hear him. The two collided with brutal force. Rylana dodged the first strike and stabbed the creature's shoulder. It screamed and swung its long arm, knocking her sideways. She hit the ground hard. Leary screamed from inside the ship. Evan grabbed the emergency barrier module from his suit. It had one last charge. He limped outside, ignoring the pain, and slammed the device into the ground. A bright circular energy shield burst outward, pushing the beast back momentarily. The creature reeled, shocked by the sudden barrier. Rylana struggled to stand. Evan hurried to her and helped her up. She looked at him, stunned that he had come outside. She placed a hand on his chest and shook her head wildly, pointing at the ship, telling him to go back inside, telling him he would die if he stayed. But Evan stayed. "I'm not leaving you," he said softly, even if she didn't understand the words. Rylana stared at him for a small moment, a moment that changed everything. Then she nodded slowly, accepting his help. The beast slammed against the fading shield. Cracks formed across the glowing surface. The final test of trust had begun. Rylana gripped her spear tightly. Evan grabbed the broken metal rod. They stepped forward side by side. When the shield shattered, the beast charged again. and the human and the alien mother fought together. The massive beast charged, its claws tearing through the dirt as it crashed toward them. Evan and Raylana stood side by side, an injured human and a tired alien mother, both refusing to back down. The creature lunged. Lana attacked first, her spear striking the beast's lower jaw. The sharp crystal tip cut through flesh, making the creature howl with fury. Evan rushed forward with a broken metal rod, swinging with all his strength. The rod hit the side of the beast's neck, leaving a small dent, not enough to hurt it, but enough to distract it. The beast snapped at Evan. He jumped back, but his injured leg gave way. He fell hard, pain exploding through his body. The creature saw its chance and roared, lifting its massive head to strike again. No! Leary's tiny voice screamed from inside the ship. Raylana's eyes widened in panic. She leaped between the beast and Evan just as the creature's claws slashed downward. Her spear broke under the force. The beast struck her shoulder, sending her tumbling across the ground. Leary cried louder, her hands covering her ears. Evan struggled to rise again. He had no strength left. His leg burned. His arms shook. But he couldn't let Leary lose her mother. Not after all they had survived together. He grabbed a sharp metal plate from the ground and stood. Trembling but determined, the beast lowered its giant head toward Raylana. Evan didn't think he acted. He ran at the creature, climbed onto its back, and drove the metal plate into the joint between its neck plates. The beast roared in pain, twisting violently to throw him off, but Evan held on tight, pressing the metal deeper. The creature slammed its back against a tree. Evan lost his grip and fell. The world spun around him. Darkness clouded his vision, but Raylana didn't waste the moment. She grabbed the broken half of her spear, leaped forward with a fierce cry, and stabbed it into the beast's exposed throat. The creature staggered backward, choking. A final weak roar escaped it before it collapsed, shaking the ground beneath them. Silence followed. Deep, heavy silence. Evan lay on his back, gasping for air. His entire body felt numb. Raylana dropped her weapon and crawled toward him. She touched his face gently, her eyes full of shock. And something else, gratitude. I ran out of the ship and threw herself onto Evan's chest, crying into his suit. Her small hands gripped his shirt tightly, as if she feared he would disappear if she let go. Evan, barely conscious, raised one shaky hand and brushed her hair softly. Raylana placed a hand on Leary's back. For the first time, she didn't pull her daughter away from him. Instead, she looked at Evan with deep respect. He had risked his life for them, for a child not his own, for a world not his home. Evan tried to sit up, but his leg collapsed beneath him. Raylana caught him, supporting him with surprising strength. She said something in her language, and even though he didn't know the words, he understood the meaning. You fought with us. You are one of us. Hours later, when the sun dipped behind the tall mountains, something unexpected happened. Evan's communicator, weak, damaged, unstable, finally caught a faint signal. It beeped softly. Evan's eyes widened. Raylana turned to him quickly, her expression worried. She pointed at the blinking light, then at the sky, then at him. She didn't understand the technology, but she knew it meant something important. Evan pressed the single working button. A button. A small human rescue drone appeared in the sky minutes later. Its bright lights scanned the area until it locked onto Evan's suit. Then it hovered above the forest, signaling that a rescue ship was on the way. Leary grabbed Evan's arm tightly. Scared, Raylana stepped back, her eyes full of sadness and acceptance. She knew humans were coming. And once they arrived, she might never see Evan again. When the rescue ship landed, fully armed soldiers rushed out. Their weapons pointed at Raylana and Leary. Evan raised his hand and shouted, "Stop! They saved my life!" The soldiers looked at him, then at the aliens. Slowly, they lowered their weapons. Rylana stepped forward and bowed her head, a gesture of honor in her culture. Evan bowed back, copying her. The soldiers watched in confusion, but Evan understood everything. This was peace. The start of something new. Before he left, Leary climbed into his arms and hugged him tightly. She placed the wooden soup bowl into his hands, the same bowl she had offered him the first day. Her eyes shined with tears. Rylana placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, then looked at Evan with a strong, soft gaze, a promise, not of danger anymore, but of friendship. When the rescue ship lifted into the sky, Evan looked down at the small alien child and her brave mother until they disappeared into the blue fog. He whispered softly, "I'll come back," because he knew the truth. Two worlds had met in fear, but separated in hope. And one day, he would return to see the child who fed him soup and the mother who once promised death, but ended up giving him life. Asterisk.